Okay, Mr. Presidio. Doctor.
All right, thank you very much. I want to start out by thanking Mr. McElveen and Ms. McLaughlin as our meeting managers for helping frame today's presentation and discussion. And as Mr. McElveen said, there are two main outcomes that you see on the slide here. And just before we start, though, I would like to just start by reminding folks, particularly in the community, of why we're here today. This work session is a follow-on work session to a work session that we had in July, where we were discussing the 2014 World Language Task Force recommendations for expanding world languages. And as we discussed at that time, we had not been able as a school system to expand world languages as rapidly as we would have liked to. And the board asked us to come back with some opportunities and associated costs for accelerating our world language program expansion. So that's what we're going to do today. We'll share some recommendations from the leadership team on expansion at the elementary and the secondary level. And then I will try to do that as quickly as possible and provide as much time for the board to discuss, as Mr. McElveen said, what your preferences might be for expansion. So to begin, I would just like to remind, again, folks in the community that this board and previous boards have had a long-standing commitment to world languages, at least all the way back to the Student Achievement Goals in 2006. Then reflected again, that commitment reflected again in Portrait of a Graduate, and most recently in the 2016 Strategic Plan. So there's a long-standing commitment on the part of the board to make sure that all of our students are able to develop skills in multiple languages. So to start the conversation about opportunities, I'm actually going to start backwards at the high school level and work our way down. And there are many questions that the board has really posed around our languages, but I think at the secondary level, the question that the board has really been focused on probably the most is equity of access for different languages. Different schools offer different languages, and that creates sometimes some inequities for some of our students who might want to study a particular language that might not be offered at their school. So we're going to use that as our guiding question as we look at our secondary programs. And I'd like to start briefly with just a summary of the current state at the high school level. And at the high school level, we have two courses, French and Spanish, two language courses that are required, or what we refer to as standard course offerings in Fairfax. That means that all of our schools are required to offer the full sequence of language levels in both Spanish and French. And then you can see we have a number of optional languages that are offered at our base schools as well. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but essentially the base schools offerings might range between 4 language offerings at a particular school all the way to 7 language offerings at a particular high school. And school administrators and principals in those buildings take into consideration a number of different factors to determine which languages that they might want to offer in their school. And of course, first is student interest. What languages and what courses are students most interested in taking? Articulation of language programs from the middle and the elementary level are also very important. So if our students start a particular language in an elementary school, that needs to be articulated to the middle school and then to the high school. And we sign pyramid articulation agreements among the principals to make sure that those programs are intact so that a student who starts studying a language early can continue to study that language into high school. Principals also look at issues of where else might students be able to access languages. What languages are available through the academies and what might be available through online campus. And then language teacher certification is always a consideration for all of our principals before opening any programs. So with that, we'd like to turn to some opportunities or options for the board to consider in terms of expansion at the high school level. And the first would be using our academy structure. So on this slide, you see that 2 of our academies currently have language offerings that are open to students outside of the base school. At Fairfax, we have Arabic, levels 1 through 3, and we will be adding in the coming year level 4, so students will be able to access level 4 there. So at Fairfax, we have Arabic, Chinese, and Korean, and then at Marshall, we have Chinese. So some of the benefits associated with pursuing an academy-based approach to expansion would be students would have access to those less commonly taught languages that maybe there aren't enough students in their particular base school for the school to be able to offer it. And then it would also allow us as a school system and as a board to make strategic determinations about which language programs we might want to offer and be a little bit more intentional about program expansion. Of course, on the challenges side, thinking about academies for expansion, there's the cost certainly of additional staffing, but there's also the issue of the travel period on students' schedules. So when students would have to travel to an academy, they're going to lose instructional time and other course-taking opportunities. And then there's a geographic challenge for some of our students in accessing academies, or accessing, I should say, particular academies from particular communities in the county. So with that in mind, what we've tried to provide is just a general overview of what some expansion opportunities at the academies might look like and what it might cost. So for example, if we were to staff all 6 of our academies, right, Chantilly, Edison, Fairfax, Falls Church, Marshall, West Potomac, if we were to staff all 6 of those academies with all of the remaining languages that are optional, currently optional languages in Fairfax County, we would be looking at a potential cost of around $3.1 million. Now, we know that we already have Arabic and Korean at one of our academies, so if we were to add Arabic and Korean, in addition to those languages above on the chart, to the remaining 5 academies, that would cost about $0.9 million. And we have Chinese currently at 2 of our academies, so if we were to add Chinese to the remaining 4 academies, that would cost about $0.3 million. So if we wanted to make all of our optional languages available at all of our academies, it would cost about $4.3 million. And you see that there's a footnote on here that talks about the need to shore up some of our existing academy staffing. We need about 5.5 FTE to be able to make that whole, because we're trading FTE right now from other academy-based programs to be able to staff the existing languages that we have at our existing academies. So that's kind of the background in terms if we wanted to go all the way in to make all of our optional languages available at all of our academies. So what did the leadership team recommend when we engaged in discussion around this? We think that one of the most prudent things to do would be to start by fully funding all of our existing languages at our academies. That's that 5.5 FTE that I discussed, and that would be a cost of about $500,000. And we would also recommend adding Chinese to those remaining academies that don't have it. And then we would have Chinese ultimately over the course of those fiscal years represented there, available at all 6 of our academies. And we would recommend adding Arabic as well, because Chinese and Arabic are both strategic languages as defined by the U.S. government. And they're also very commonly spoken languages among students, their heritage languages among many students in Fairfax County as well. And then we would also recommend adding American Sign Language. And one of the reasons for this is that it's been a very accessible class for many of our students with disabilities, and we'd like to be able to make that more widely available to more students, and we would recommend doing that at Fairfax Academy because that's the most centrally located academy. So if we were to do all of those recommendations, that would total about $1.3 million, okay? And that's over the course of those fiscal years represented there. It would get us a little bit more access geographically to some less commonly taught languages and strategic languages. And I'm going very quickly to try to give you as much time as possible for discussion. So an additional opportunity for expanding world languages at the high school level would be through our online campus. So the current state of online campus right now, you can see we have Chinese, Korean, and Spanish, and benefits and challenges associated with using the online campus for program expansion. First of all, it would provide access to those less commonly taught languages for students without them having to leave their base school. They wouldn't have to travel like they would if they were to go to an academy. It would also allow for that strategic implementation of languages, allowing us as a school system, staff, and board to work together to identify what languages we wanted to have offered. The challenge, I think, the main challenge at the online campus is that learning format may not work well for all learners. Students who currently take our languages online are doing very well. They have very high success rates, both on their grades and on exams, but it's not necessarily the best learning format for all students. So that would be one of the challenges. So thinking about what that might look like in terms of an opportunity and the cost factors, you can see there's always the curriculum development costs when we start a new language, because we've got to create basically that online course. So creating the curriculum, putting it in an online learning environment, certainly the cost of the teacher, and then we really need an additional resource, well, I shouldn't say an additional resource teacher. We need a resource teacher at the online campus to support our language programs if we're going to expand there. Because right now we don't have anybody who can support the teachers and support the students that are in those classes. We're relying on other specialists to be able to do that. So what would be some potential languages for expansion? Again, we've really focused on those optional languages that we currently offer in Fairfax County at some of our base schools, and some additional languages that we've heard interest in parts of the community. So as a leadership team then, thinking about these opportunities at online campus, we've recommended the following. The first would be to add Arabic to the online campus first, following that sequence that you see there of development and then implementation, because it does take a little while to develop the program. Arabic and Japanese together at the same time, then adding American Sign Language, and then perhaps other languages that the board might be interested in looking at. And we listed a few here, Hebrew, German, Vietnamese. It does not necessarily mean we would recommend those specific languages, but those are languages that we've had conversations with individual board members about. And then the cost of the online campus resource teacher. So if you were to total up all of these costs to add these courses over this period of time to the online campus, we'd be looking at about $0.6 million. So those are the high school recommendations. I want to move quickly to middle school. And at middle school, during our July work session, the conversation focused largely around making high school credit-bearing courses, level 1 world language high school credit-bearing courses available to students beginning in 7th grade. And the board asked us for a plan to do that. So I think it's important to understand, again, the current state as we look at this opportunity. First of all, again, French and Spanish are those required standard course offerings offered at all of our middle schools. And then again, other languages are offered at other base middle schools, and those are listed here. And also it's important to remember that most of our middle schools offer a 2-year sequence, meaning you can get 1 high school credit by taking level 1 part A and level 1 part B over a 2-year period of time. And all of our middle schools additionally offer level 1 credit-bearing courses in world languages starting in 8th grade. So there are already opportunities for students to earn credit in world languages starting in middle school. Now, in terms of increasing that access to those credit-bearing courses starting in grade 7, benefits and challenges. So in terms of the benefits, it's obviously giving students an opportunity to earn 2 credits, 2 world language credits, and that's creating additional opportunity for students to explore other electives while they're in high school, which has been a priority on the part of the board. And it does better align to supporting our students that are already in existing language programs. So LTC, FLES, Immersion programs, it creates that continuity of experience for students. The challenges, though, however, are significant, and we talked a lot about these at the leadership team level, and we had a lot of conversation with our task force that looked at these recommendations over the spring and into the summer. And in the July work session, we talked about some of these challenges, but I do want to bring them up again. The first is a concern that if we were to add this opportunity to start in 7th grade to earn level 1 credit, that it might by default actually cause us to eliminate the Part A and Part B sequence, because many students might actually decide, well, I want to take this credit-bearing opportunity starting in 7th grade, and as a result, other students, we might not have enough students to be able to run the Part A and Part B sequence, which right now many students choose to take. So if we accelerate that, we might not have this opportunity for some students. The other issue is this concern about increased stress, and we've talked quite a lot about the increased academic expectations and accelerating students and how that can potentially lead to increased amounts of stress for our students. Additionally, there's a sincere concern about students decreasing participation in other electives, because if students are taking more world language courses, they're going to take less of something else, right? Arts, CTE classes, music classes perhaps, and that's a real concern because we want middle school to be a time of exploration and developing interests in students. And then as students accelerate and start language in 7th grade, they will, in high school, max out in terms of the number of courses that they take, and there will be some amount of gap between when they finish their course-taking experience in high school in languages and when they start college, and there's concerns about that. So cost factors here actually are quite minimal, so I'm not going to spend much time talking about those because I think we can meet the cost factors if the board chooses to move this direction within our existing budget. So the recommendation on the part of the leadership team was to expand our current pilot. We have 2 schools right now, Franklin and Herndon, who have been piloting offering these opportunities. The leadership team felt like we should expand our pilot to include a few more schools and collect more objective data and look at that before we were to push forward with expanding this opportunity really as a requirement to be offered as a standard course offering at all schools. So that's middle school. We're going to move now quickly to elementary. And I think the main question here at the elementary level is to figure out what level of consensus there is on the part of the board to prioritize world language learning for all students. And we know there's been a long-standing commitment to this, but there are some financial considerations that would have to be prioritized for us to move forward in a faster manner here. So this slide is important for understanding the different types of programs that we offer at the elementary level. The first is our immersion programs. We have 2 different types of immersion programs. The first type of immersion are school-based programs. And you see that we have 4 schools currently that are offering school-based immersion programs. And in a school-based immersion program, we're serving students from the base school. And these programs are unique because you have 50% of your students in that language class that are native English speakers that are learning the target language. In this case, it's Spanish. And you have 50% of your students that are native speakers of the non-English target language. And in this case, again, of course, it's Spanish. And most of those students are actually English learners. So we are providing additional ESOL services to students through this model, and it's benefiting those students, and it's accelerating their English language development. And we're providing enrichment opportunities for our native English speakers to learn a second language. So the benefit of this program, there's a dual benefit, and the research base is really strong that this is one of the most effective ways to serve English learners. And we've seen the same thing in our data here. So we've got 4 of those school-based programs right now, and as you see, we have 27 schools that would be eligible for expansion, meaning we can staff those programs within the existing base school with the existing base school students in a relatively cost-neutral way again. All right? So this is a big area for us to be thinking about expansion. We'll come back to that when we talk about the recommendations. The second type of immersion program are our division-wide lottery programs, and you can see that we have 12 schools that are offering division-wide lottery programs in the different languages that are listed here. And the division-wide lottery program is a program that is open for all students across the county to apply to for spaces in those programs, and we obviously conduct a lottery to determine who would be admitted. So these programs are available in a variety of different languages, and we can talk about the benefits of these programs as well. So I want to put those programs, school-based, division-wide lottery immersion programs over here for a second, because those are programs that we would refer to as full-time programs. Students are in those programs every day. Okay? Then you have our part-time programs, which are our foreign language and elementary school FLES, and our language through content programs. We have 54 of these programs currently in the county in the different languages that are listed here. These are part-time programs because students only get about 60 minutes a week of instruction in these programs. Okay? They do serve all students in the school, though, right? So that is a distinguishing feature and characteristic. And just kind of looking at the body language around the table, when I talked about the amount of instructional time that you get in the part-time program, I always remind people that the program goals are different for a part-time program than they are for an immersion program. In an immersion program, we're developing students working towards proficiency and accelerating that over a compressed period of time. In our part-time programs, we're looking at functional language or novice levels of language learning proficiency. We're exposing students, getting them interested, building their background, and working on their functional language skills, basic communication skills. The program goals are different, and people always need to be able to distinguish the different program goals from Immersion and from our part-time programs. So now that we've distinguished these different programs, I want to talk a little bit about what some of the expansion opportunities could look like. First is around those two-way immersion programs that I just mentioned, particularly those school-based programs. We have 27 schools that would meet the criteria to be able to open a program soon. What is the criteria? Essentially, you have to have enough native speakers of the target language. So what is enough? More than a third of the students in that school should be native speakers of the target language in order for us to be able to ensure that we're not going to lose students over the years through attrition, right? So we have 27 schools eligible to do that in Spanish today. Benefits, students get to remain in their base school. They don't have to win placement into a lottery program and transfer out of their base school. We utilize the base school staffing allocation and no transportation's needed. The challenges really are around, finding the highly qualified teachers to be able to teach in these programs. But additionally, it's this idea of competing interests at these schools. These schools that have high numbers of English learners often are schools that have high percentages of poverty, Title I schools, that often have a lot of competing priorities and things that they're trying to do in those schools. And it takes a lot to start a new program like this, and it takes a lot of support, and it takes a lot of leadership on the part of the principal, and that is a real challenge. Additionally, there's always concerns on the part of leadership in the schools and the regions that this would lead to destaffing, because obviously you can only teach these classes if you're bilingual, and that might mean that we might have to destaff a monolingual teacher from this particular school and have them staff somewhere else in the county, and nobody ever wants to see teachers transferring out of their schools. So again, the cost factors are pretty minimal here. We think we could do this within our existing budget. So the recommendation would be, we know that we have 27 of these schools, but we also know that it is a lot to try to implement these programs. So we would recommend that we try to implement about up to 3 programs in the coming fiscal year. And that's a lot. So that might be too much. That might be too aggressive. Or depending on where you sit, that might not be aggressive enough. So that's our first opportunity. Second opportunity is around expanding the number of division-wide lottery programs. So again, benefits here around the board being able to select certain languages, strategic languages, to be placed strategically around the county. All of our students in the county would be eligible for these programs. And a lot of the challenges are the same, but here you have the additional challenge of you have to leave your base school, and parents have to provide transportation for these programs. And we do see a fair amount of attrition in these programs, particularly at 3rd grade when some of our students might qualify for AAP and choose to attend an AAP center. Why is attrition a problem? Well, then you end up with smaller class sizes in the upper grades, and it's hard to find enough students that can actually push into those classes. In fact, it's almost impossible to find a student who could push into a class in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or 5th or 6th grade if they don't have that language background experience. So the recommendation here would be to think about implementing up to 2 division-wide lottery programs in critical languages. We couldn't do that for FY20. The earliest we could do it would be for FY21 because we would need to conduct a lottery process, and we don't have time really to do that in preparation for FY20 right now. So the final opportunity is to think about expanding part-time programs, our FLES or our LTC program, and that the benefits, as I talked about, is again, you have all of the students in the school participating in a program like that. There is a lot of research about the additional benefits beyond language learning, cognitive flexibility, for example, that influences student achievement. And then our Portrait of a Graduate attributes in terms of fostering awareness and respect of different cultures is a huge benefit. The challenges, as we talked about, we're focusing on functional language skills. And that might not be where the board wants to focus. We might want to focus more on proficiency instead of functional and novice level proficiency. Finding enough highly qualified teachers is always difficult. And then scheduling with all of the competing interests that the principals need to balance out is really hard to do in a master schedule because we have so many different specials, multiple levels of music, chorus, art, PE, library, STEAM. I mean, we have, AART, advanced academics. There's so much that has to be scheduled in our elementaries that's often difficult. So the cost factor, as we've been working with financial services, that we think we would need to be able to actually expand to all of our additional elementary schools to get that additional staffing that would be needed is about $1.6 million. And I say approximately because on paper, that staffing formula works, but anybody who's ever tried to staff a school knows that the formula on paper, we don't really ever think that that's going to work perfectly when we try to implement it in the school. So as a result, we're recommending, as I go to the next slide, that we hold off on expanding the part-time programs until we're able to actually pilot a part-time program with the new staffing formula to figure out if it actually is going to work for schools or not. So this is a summary slide of all of the recommendations and the associated costs just for FY20. We can talk about costs for the out years as well, but I know part of the urgency around getting this work session in was to think about if there's things that we want to put into the budget for FY20. So with that, I'm going to pause and see. I saw a number of hands around to start board discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sloan. Great expeditious presentation. So we have a full list of board members who want to speak. One thing, as I said at the outset, that I want people to think about is this division between functional and proficiency in terms of where we want to go with teaching our kids. We have the elementary, middle, and high, as you see up there, and also where we want to put languages and which languages we want to focus on. So do we want to focus on things we already do well? Do we want to focus on critical languages? I think Sloan kind of went down that path. But I would say that it is critical for us to think about this now, because this is essentially the last budget process we're going to have with this school board as it is. And all of us have been very passionate about this issue. We've had many conversations, and so it's really our last chance as a full board to make a mark on this program. So that's something I want people to think about. Mm-hmm. So with that, I want to start with Karen Corbett Sanders, followed by Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you. And for those of you who don't know, I was actually Ryan's appointee to the original internationalization working group many years ago. And I think that this is progress in many ways, but it also is not quite where I want to be yet. First off, I don't think it takes into context what the demand for foreign languages are broadly as a life skill. I think it tends to be almost an ad hoc approach at this point, and I don't really think that that is as strategic as I'd like to see it. And that's why, for example, we talk about it. I'm going to start at the high school level and work my way down. But at the high school level, we're talking about reinforcing the existing academy programs in an online campus. But we actually have a number of high schools that could benefit greatly from a program such as this as a way of attracting people into the school. And so I'm not sure we need to necessarily reinforce the existing academies and making them larger as much as perhaps looking at a new an additional languages academy program someplace more centrally located, because I can tell you that in my area of the world, getting to Fairfax or Marshall is a bit of a challenge, and so I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the absence of a priority on Latin as a language. And as somebody who studied Latin for a very long time, I understand the importance of Latin as not only a language, as a gateway to other foreign languages, but it's also a gateway for deeper literacy. And so we don't see an expansion of Latin at all here. At a minimum, we should look at it in our online campus because, frankly, unless you went to a Catholic university, you probably never actually spoke Latin as part of your regular school day. But
If I could, just on that point, and I failed to include this in the slide, Latin is currently offered at all of our high schools except 3. So we're pretty close to universal Latin access.
so I would think that it needs to be in all of our high schools, and frankly, it needs to be in our middle schools, because it's such an important language for teaching kids how how words are formed in our structures. And so rather than waiting until they're in high school, I would urge that we should be looking at that at the middle school level. I'm all in for the two-way immersion. However, I think that the two-way immersion, we should also be looking at it as a potential for some of our high schools that have significant Spanish-speaking populations. And so we should be taking a deeper dive there. And then and ensuring that we have a continuity of languages between our middle and our high school programs, because I know that in some of our high schools, we introduce a new language by the time they're in high school. And so we should be looking at, making sure that we have that continuity. I am a big believer in introducing a foreign language in 7th grade for credit. And it's because it does allow for greater flexibility and choice for our students as they matriculate. It also is a international skill. And if you read the studies, it takes 7 years to master a language. So starting in 7th grade, you still don't master it by your senior year. And at a minimum, all of our IB pyramids should have robust language programming.
Ms. Corbett Sanders, may I clarify one thing on that, if that's okay?
Sure.
I think the difference is not whether or not students have access to language in 7th grade. It's whether we're splitting level 1 into 7th and 8th grade. And so it does not affect it in the timing of when we start. I just want to be clear. It's whether it's level 1 split or level 1 and then level 2.
No, I would like to see a 1-year credit-bearing course in 7th grade. Because what happens is when parents and children start talking about their middle school academic planning, they will look at the split and wonder why bother in 7th grade if they only get a certain percentage, and a half a credit or something. And so I would just urge that we need to have that offering. We offer advanced math in 7th grade. Why wouldn't we offer the opportunity for language? And I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we have Elizabeth and Keys Gamaro.
Okay, I have a number of very specific observations. First of all, I very much appreciate this. I think we should be given as a next step, what was the previous version of this? Because we continue to battle this assertion that languages have waned. The choices have waned. So I would like to see what was in place prior to this year. I don't know if you want to go back 2 years.
So we can give you some more information on that. We'd be happy to do that, and I want to let you get going in a second on your other points. But one thing just to remember is that we don't offer a language and then completely stop offering a language. We phase things out over time. So it's very easy for us to go back and say 3 years ago, for example, School X started phasing out Program Y. So we can do that.
I think it's perfectly reasonable for you to asterisk that at that point it was being phased out. It might still be being offered, but it will soon no longer be offered because I have had a lot of pushback from my constituents who are unhappy about.
And the reason I bring that up is for a couple points. One, when you looked at our recommendations, German was one of the programs that we were recommending for expansion because we do have a couple schools that are currently in the process of phasing out German.
So that's one. 2 is a question of the percentage or the overemphasis. The concern I'm reflecting is an overemphasis on Spanish, that Spanish seems to be sort of like our easy go-to, and that many colleges and universities actually don't, when they look at a rigor of a curriculum, that they don't consider Spanish at the same level as a curriculum choice of another language, and that students are being deemed to be less competitive if they're taking Spanish versus, you know, Korean or Arabic or, you know, French or something else. So that's another concern I've had expressed to me. The number of students enrolled in these over time. My same data point, I'm consistent, whether it's total enrollment or enrollment in language. I don't know what the scope of the problem we're discussing. Are we talking, you know, 5,000 students, 10,000 students, 50,000? I don't know, like, in any of these versions, I don't have any association of the number of students. How many were enrolled, you know, 5 years ago? How many are enrolled now? By language, by region? Do we have higher participation in some areas and not? I don't have, like, there's no tangible understanding.
But we can definitely do it that way. The way we've counted is we've counted schools participating, right? So we definitely can do it on a student count if you'd prefer to do that. The reason I think, though, sometimes it's in schools is important is we're a long ways away from even having all of our schools have access to language, let alone all of our students. So at the elementary level, both of the immersion program models are for some students, not for all students in the school.
I think that's the whole reason why the numbers are important, because it quantifies it.
Sure.
I mean, the number of schools is irrelevant if the number of students are participating in one school is 2% and another school is 10%, and it's 2% of a 1,500 student school and it's 10% of a 800 student. I mean, you know, the numbers matter.
They do, and we're happy to provide them by student.
I completely agree about middle school and Latin, and for a relatively particular reason. I don't see addressed anywhere in here the concern for 14% of our population, which is special education, and how we meet those needs. And I have long asked, and I'm still asking, that we seek, and we didn't do it again this year, but I think we need to seek coding as a language exception for students with dyslexia and disabilities, but in particular, Latin actually has shown to help those students. So Latin and coding are, you know, particular areas in the special ed that I think that we should explore. I don't understand why we're only sort of looking at traditional model of delivery of foreign language, as opposed to, like, I've been to other school districts where they have sort of this language lab, you know, immersion, where you have, you know, you're operating with dropped headsets and technology and repetition back and interactive between, you know, paired students and enhanced instruction model.
Yeah, so let me talk briefly about that, because I think there are some opportunities with technology to look at enhancing the instruction that students are getting. And we're using technology right now in some different ways. So online campus is one. We're exploring some efficiencies of staffing around using technology, where you might have 5 students in this classroom at this school and 10 students in another classroom learning from the same teacher at the same time. So we're using technology in some ways. We haven't really done those language labs that you're talking about that are primarily for reinforcement of skills, right? So that when the teacher's not providing direct instruction, students are getting technology enhanced and supplemented instruction. With FCPS on, I think we've got an opportunity to do more of that. There are costs associated with that, right? But every student is going to have a device at the high school, right? I mean, starting at the high school level. So, I mean, if we actually have money to purchase more of that software, that's an opportunity for students to get enhancement and reinforcement. And the same thing could be true if the board chooses to expand technology and
So while the board we seem to have gone to the on the FCPS on enhancing sort of the high school students, I think we should go the other direction actually with language. The earlier exposure, the more you know, neuroflexible the student is, and the more you know, able they are to adapt, you know, the less inclined they are to push back. And in that vein, why basically either the FLES model or immersion? I don't understand why it's either or. Why these are, so you get 60 minutes a week, 30 minutes twice a week, or however, 15 minutes 4 times a week, or it's immersion.
Well, I don't
And there's
think it's
nothing
an
in
either
between.
or. No, I don't think
Well,
it's an.
that's really what our 2 models are.
Well, let me talk about the 2 models for a second. What I mean when I say I don't think it's either or is you could have a school that would have both, right? So there's some challenges with thinking about trying to get an immersion program to all of the students in a school, let alone all of the schools in Fairfax County, right? Sometimes we point at these schools and say, oh, they're a school-wide immersion program. Well, that's awesome. That's like one school, right? How are we going to do that for 141 schools in all these different languages and have a faculty of 100, Chinese teachers in just one school, for example? It would be really, really hard to bring to scale in Fairfax. So what we've been trying to look at is figure out what do we think is manageable and attainable. So that's why we're privileging some of the things in these recommendations like Spanish, because we already have the students there. We have a student population to implement a program that would have benefits for target speakers of the second language, Spanish, and and benefits for our English learners. That's something that would not cost money. It's largely cost neutral, and it would meet multiple board goals at the same time. So one of our challenges in these program models is not to say either or, but to say how can different program models complement and provide a more holistic approach to language learning.
But where's the model of just 40 minutes of instruction per day? I mean, where's the just the model of you're delivering language instruction for the sake of delivering language instruction.
So that's where you get into the challenge,
content.
Right? So that's where you get into the challenge at the elementary level of trying to figure out how to do that with all of the other specials that we have in our schedule, right? So unless we expanded the day, or unless we put in a lot of money to hire a lot of additional language teachers at the elementary level, it would be really difficult to schedule another class, if you will, on top of music and chorus and band and strings and art and library and advanced academics and STEAM. There's not other school systems that have the breadth of elementary offerings like we have. So, I mean, we have to make some choices at some point, right? So if the board chose to do that, we could do that. But probably the impact is going to be that we're going to have less of something else that we already have in our schedule.
Okay, so what I'm trying to do is say I think
it's good brainstorming. Yeah.
Moving away from, I have not been, and because it's costly and I don't think it's that effective, and I think being exposed to a language is like, I don't know. That's not where I favor us spending our time, and I think the return on investment is profoundly costly. A couple of other things. Russian. I don't see any Russian really being emphasized, and French. And I think we ought to be looking at correlating national security and job opportunities. What is available in that is an unfilled or that portends to offer someone something on the outside afterwards. And I can say this, my first exposure to French was in 5th grade. And I ended up taking it again at Chantilly High School for just 2 more years, and that's the sum total formal education I had. But I was able to acquire so much just having started that exposure in elementary school, and that gained all kinds of life things that I picked up along the way. Number of students enrolled over time. Oh, the last thing is the maintained cohort. This is the one problem about the expansion for some of these programs that you have in middle or high school, particularly high school, is what I've heard from principals is that particularly in certain languages, we have we've been done a great job at providing it through the pyramid, so that they're taking it in elementary school, they're taking it in middle school, and by the time they get to high school, they're burnt out, they're done with it, and this is a little bit on the A-B, whether we're offering it in middle school or not, that by the time they get to high school, they just want to do something else. They are done, and then they get the principals struggle with the master schedule in high school of how do you fit in a teacher when you have a handful of students who want to take that higher level language.
Yeah, if I could just speak briefly to that. I mean, I think that's true. Definitely it's true for some students. Other students want to continue in the language, which creates the challenge for us in the system. which is one of the reasons why when we recommend program expansion at the high school level, we really are privileging academy and online campus, because if we had that access, then we could guarantee that students that started a program and wanted to continue would have access to it, even if there weren't enough students in their base school to do it.
So they could do online. This is like a Skyped, version, because I've got to imagine that if you have a language that we have some students who want to have, especially at a real higher level, that'd be great. But if you have a few here and a few here and a few there, and you have some centered in another place, you know what? Skype them in. I mean, can we not?
We're trying to do some of that. It's it's essentially the same thing.
I mean, Dr. O'Brien, honestly, we want to talk about educating for the 21st century. This is how education is going to be going forward. And when we plan, facility space and curriculum offerings, fine. I want us to be able to, even at the elementary level, you know what? We can set the bar and, leave everybody in our wake, but it does mean that we have to some degree reimagine our ed specs, and that we may have to have rooms that are monitored by a staff member, but through which that content is provided by an educator that's not necessarily in that building. And so as we're talking about our options, that's really kind of how I want us to be forward thinking, is that we're planning for how we should be educating down the road, not trying to catch up to stuff we maybe haven't done in the past.
Ms. Schultz, are you done? Okay. I have Ms. Karen Keys-Gamora, followed by Ms. Evans, and then Ms. Koufax.
Thank you. I want to start with a question that's embedded in the presentation on the slide number 14. Is the school board, well, the sentence doesn't make a lot of sense. Is there school board consensus to prioritize access to world languages? As one board member, that is my for elementary students, yes. As one board member, yes. I want to express that as my priority. I mean, I think that's where the research is, brain development. There's a difference between being exposed in first and second grade and trying to figure it out in seventh grade or in high school. So I think that's where, in terms of getting the most bang for our buck and our time, as well as our students, I think it happens in elementary school. So I just want to say that I wanted to answer that question because it's the only question in here. So I wanted to
just as a reminder, those are broad framing questions for all of the specifics that have to fall underneath it, which relate to the recommendations that we provided. So if there's consensus on the part of the board, is there consensus to expand our part-time programs, our immersion programs, at what rate?
I think we can talk about. I'm going to go through some of the other things, but since this was the only question you had, I wanted to answer it. Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So, the other concern I have, and I'm looking at this map, when I think about the question of equity, there are sections in here with not a lot of access. And I think a lot of it is in Karen's magisterial district. That's okay, I'll speak for both of you. I'm right. So that's concerning to me. So when you start talking about centering some of the access in the academies, I don't think it addresses this problem. And I know that we maybe broadly think of Fairfax High School as centrally located, but not for some of our districts, and not even really Lee.
So a couple things I just want to remind folks of. There's a map for elementary, there's a map for middle, and there's a map for high. And I think the one that you're referring to right now is the elementary map, and you're absolutely right. There are really big gaps in some of those regions. If the board was supporting the recommendation to expand those two-way immersion school-based programs, the majority of those programs are in Region 2 and Region 3, where we need to have more access right now. And then to your point, at the high school level, we have gaps as well when we think about access to academies, right? So that was the impetus, at least in part, for the recommendation for us to say, let's start adding strategically languages to all of our academies, not just to Fairfax Academy and not just to Marshall, so that we'd have better geographic access to those language programs.
Well, I'm still not sure that the academies are going to address some of these neglected areas as in terms of having access. Travel is a major issue in Fairfax County. Traffic is a major issue. So that would be a concern.
So that was one of the challenges, which is why we're recommending also expanding online campus access so that for students that would have that transportation.
And I think that brings me back to the statement about equity. So I see the problems. I'm just stating my priorities as one board member. And I assume my colleagues will speak to it as well. So for me, elementary school is a priority. I do support the two-way immersion. I was able to be at Braddock Elementary with Dr. Brabran the other day, and it's just amazing things that we're seeing our students doing. I think that's really the model of the future, making that access, whether it be language or coding, as Ms. Schultz mentioned, all of those things were available in that school, and our kids were absolutely thriving. And I got quite excited, actually, just as a footnote. So I would definitely support that, and would love to hear more from staff as to how to expand that kind of model. I think it addresses some of the concerns that Ms. Schultz mentioned with respect to special education and being able to include the coding, I forget the second thing that she mentioned. I know coding was one of them, as a possibility to make sure that we're addressing our special education kids. But those thriving communities are going to make the rest of what we do in middle and high school, I think, so much easier for everyone involved. I do support the online access. However, I would be mindful of whether we're having classes in certain regions. Like if I draw a circle up here at the top, I'm going to be hard-pressed to miss an area that's actually having greater access than other places. And so I don't think online access can really address the equity issue. I think we have to, I know it's difficult, and I know that even coming up with these proposals was a lot of work. But I would like to just push a little harder, because I'm concerned about some of our magisterial districts that literally are not served by, and to say we're going to give them online, I'm not sure that really meets the equity objectives. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Sandy, followed by Tammy.
Thank you. I appreciate the report. I guess I'll pick up on the equity issue, because that is, of course, always one of my concerns. And while, we see a mix, certainly that some of the schools that are qualified to get two-way immersion, I would welcome that, particularly because it's so cost effective. If you had two-way immersion, that would be available for every child in the school.
We wouldn't have the capacity to do that. We'd typically start with one class at a particular grade level and then go up to the next grade level. Potentially, if we had enough staff, you could get to a school-wide model, but that would be really difficult.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And as far as I do see the maps, and I very much appreciate the maps. These were very helpful, but it does show some of the discrepancies. It shows you've got one high school with 8 languages and other high schools with 4. And I do see that as an issue. You mentioned only 3 didn't have Latin, but those 3 are Justice High School, Lee High School, and Mount Vernon High School. So I think we need to be cognizant of that as we're rolling out languages. And I also think when we get to something like a lottery program, I think those can be very effective programs, and particularly if you need critical mass for certain kinds of languages. Personally, I would, we do have some schools that can use a special draw to them. And I would recommend, if we do go in that direction, that we put those programs into Title I schools, make that something that's a little bit special for those schools. We do some of that now. But not all of our schools that have the the lottery are Title I. At least I think they're not all. Have we done any kind of a survey in terms of, well, I'll back up. When we added Vietnamese to Falls Church High School, the first thing we did was a survey to see whether there was enough interest to warrant it. And there was, and so we were able to put the program in there. Have we done anything like that countywide to see, for example, would there be enough students who want German, Arabic, Japanese? Do we have that kind of data?
We haven't done any county-wide surveys, and I think largely, I mean, it's something we could do. There's time and work and expense in that. And largely, I don't know what the benefit of that would be, because really what you want to know is, would students at a particular school where you'd place that program be interested in taking it, right?
Unless you created a lottery program, unless you created a magnet, or if you went to the academies.
Right, and in that instance, we're pretty likely to have enough students that would want to place into a program, right?
Okay.
So typically that's the way we've done it. So recently we've done some surveying of students around different languages, Chinese, Korean. We've been working on Hebrew at one school. So we've been doing that more on a school by school basis than countywide.
Okay.
One other point on that,
Sure.
I'm sorry. One of the kind of the tenets of what we do before we open a program in a school, though, is community engagement. So it's not just surveying, but it's really trying to allow the community to have a voice in what language would be offered in a particular school. So if we targeted, for example, strategically a Title I school, I don't think even then we'd want to say, okay, you're going to get Russian. Maybe the board had 3 or 5 languages that you were interested in strategically expanding, and then we engage that community to determine what's the best fit for the majority of families in that community. That's typically how we've done it.
And I guess one thing that I believe I've asked this in the past, if there are any other schools that have the critical mass for two-way immersion in any other language, and of course I'm thinking of one in particular, the Arabic at Glen Forest.
We don't yet, but we're really close in Arabic.
At that one school, or
Yeah.
are there other schools as well?
Just the one.
Just the one,
Yeah.
okay. I would be interested in pursuing that. I think that's, if we're almost there, I think that's certainly a school that when I go in that area, I'm asked many, many times by parents, how can I get my child Arabic?
And that is the third most commonly spoken home language: English, Spanish, and then Arabic. And
So that
FCPS.
might be, that might warrant having some sort of a lottery program there. I mean, not that we have a lot of room at Glen
Absolutely.
Forest, but
Yep.
that's something else we're working on. So I think that's it. I mean, to answer your question, I do think eventually, however we get there, we do need to provide language for all of our elementary school students at some point. I understand the difficulties of it and working everything in that are that we want all of our elementary school students to get, as well as our middle school students. I know it can be difficult, but I think in the scheme of things, the way the world is now, we need to be starting early with all of our kids to the extent we can. Thank you.
We have Tammy, then Dahlia, and Janie.
So my two colleagues before me spoke to what I was going to begin with. I think one of the most important things we have to do is start in elementary school. Right now, and Sloan, this is not at you. This is the result of budgets that we've never been able to, lack of budgeting, lack of funding, inability, countrywide to find the best teachers, the best language teachers. So when we went to full day Mondays, it was our hope to somehow get that did not happen for some of the reasons you're talking about. How do you schedule the other specials? But I think had we had a cadre of the best and brightest, we might have been able to, the best and brightest teachers, and lots of them in the pipeline. But that was one of our biggest challenges. I'm aware of that. My colleagues, 54 out of 140 of our elementary schools have languages offered. 54 out of 140. And you look at that, you look at that map where you draw things around. Inequities in region 3, 4, what are you, 2? 3. Yeah, you're 2. You're 2, I'm 3. You know, this is where we are, and nobody here is at fault per se, but that is where it begins. I mean, all the research promotes to the earlier you introduce language, the longer it stays with you, the more proficient you become, the more interested you become. So I am concerned a little bit about our hold on expanding FLES or whatever, and I would like an exploration of what Ms. Schultz said. Is there somewhere between FLES, immersion, and just offering it as a you know, whatever, one of the blocks? And I know your challenge is specials and how you fit that in. But I would love to explore that, because I think that might be the, well, I'm not saying it's the best way, but I would like to see that explored as an option. And I would love a time period for this to happen, because we have been talking about this for 7 years. And most of the 7 years we've been cutting things rather than growing things. So again.
But we can do that. There's no question we can explore a part-time model and cost that out and everything. I would say, though, I wouldn't want to give anybody the expectation that a part-time model like that of 60 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day is going to lead to proficiency, because it's not.
That.
I mean, 50% of the day in the programs that we have now barely are leading to the levels of proficiency that we would want to see, right? It's just, it takes a lot of time.
I know.
So would you get a little bit more proficiency than what we get in our FLES LTC program? Yes, but you wouldn't get what we get in the Immersion program now.
Right.
So that's the only caveat. But we can develop a model of what that might look like.
But I am really concerned about the equity. I mean, you know, right now, the first time you're, you know, I understand you're trying to look at the middle school model, and I'll speak to my concerns about the challenges that you put out there. But right now, you know, lots of times, the first time you're being presented in a Fairfax County public school for a language is 8th grade. I mean, you have the option in 7th grade, but you know, it's hard, and if you don't have the interest, it doesn't become a priority for you. It doesn't become something that you feel is part of your education spectrum, and I don't like seeing that, because I see that a lot from the children in my area. They don't view that as something that's important to them, or they need to learn, because they had like their 2 years they had to have in 8th and 9th grade, or 9th and 10th grade, and you know, and we can talk again about, you know, it's difficult to get the best teachers for that, so sometimes that is a concern as well. In the 27 school, so that you talked about that, the two-way immersion. Not all children have to participate, but all children have access, but they don't all have to participate. And as a matter of fact, you don't think you could model it, so all would have to. So I want to make sure about that. I am concerned, and I think I must have been the I was going to be the manager of this work session at an earlier time, because you and I talked about the challenges about, I am concerned about, I'm not saying we shouldn't offer it, but there's a couple things. When you start, you know, it is languages and learning, it's a different stressor, because we talk a lot about pushing down curriculum and the stress that it adds to kids, and not allowing them to explore more options in 7th and 8th grade by, you know, all of those other things that are really good and really there. The arts, you know, all of the band, orchestra, chorus, the fine, you know, drawing and whatever we now do. We don't call it home economics, but there's all of those kinds of things that you will be missing if you kind of push it down. And I know you talked about in some cases when they pushed it down and kids didn't have access at elementary school, it was a stressor because kids were expunging their grades because it's a high school credit, and they, you know, so I think we have to think about that when we line up and we say, where are we going to add our dollars? So, you know, I probably wouldn't be as big of, you know, to add limited funds right now to that middle school program because I'm big on the challenges and what that brings. I would prefer to add our monies in the elementary school, and then access. I'm big about the access. I like what you're talking about in high schools, and you know, and adding things in academies and things like that, because it is difficult as we add and we add to all those schools. So there is access because you know, I've shared with you before, you know, you can't get to Fairfax High School from our area in high school. You know, you have to, because of the transportation, you could only take 5. You can get there, but you have to eliminate 2 periods of your day to get there. And that's too much. That's too much when you talk about, you know, wanting to be seen as a serious student, rigor and things like that. That's too much to just do because of transportation. And then there's also the concern that we don't have enough kids of a particular thing to fill up a bus, so you have to provide your own transportation. So if you got your 16-year-old driving from Lee District to Fairfax, which is not an easy drive, it's a 45-minute drive, no matter how you, and so I like having access there, so because it's easy to get from West Potomac to Edison, and you know, those are manageable drives, and you don't have to give up these big periods. So you know, I appreciate you putting it all out there, but that's kind of where I am right now, adding as much as we can to elementary schools, looking at another model, and I guess we as a board will have to decide, is exposure better than, is some exposure better than no exposure versus, you know, all this proficiency, because it's going to take us a long time to get to all of these schools. And we've been working, I think Ryan shared with me, we started at 40 when we were first on the board, and we added 14 in 7 years, and that's not bad considering where we've been, you know, cutting things. We at least added to this but we're nowhere where we need to be as far as exposure to languages in elementary school, where it matters the most, and what kind of model can we do there. And so that's where I am.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm just trying to find out on the ask, like, was what we did enough? Like, are we voting on something, or?
I think at the end of this, we're kind of going to give staff direction. We're going to put our hands up on what our preference would be on what areas to focus.
Okay. Well, so I have a community commitment in one of my schools that's pretty serious. Do you feel like I conveyed
I have your
enough
notes
that you understand?
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, next we're going to go with Dahlia, then Janie, then Ilyan.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, there is another model, Elizabeth and Tammy, it's called integration. I know I've had a lot of conversations with staff about this. This is an area where I do hope we engage more in integration, meaning it's outside of the language classroom, right? So how do we find times to co-plan, to have curriculum in music, in choir, in PE, in play, in morning meeting? At my school, our kindergarten teacher and Spanish teacher, you know, had morning meeting together once a week and created units that were integrating Spanish with the content area. So that really is, when you can't get to immersion, right, the next best thing. I know we had this conversation, and that's where I do hope, and I love hearing my colleagues bring it up. I do hope that we start to see, because I agree with, I'm so happy to see this divided up, because it is the vertical alignment that we have to really focus on. And I think I'm hearing that we're all saying we need to invest more at the elementary level. We have to figure out how to get there and what it means. I really like, and as you know, trying to get the school-based immersion programs, because from my understanding, last time I checked with Dr. Duran, our access to the immersion programs, we saw even less students of color accessing our language immersion programs and our AAP programs. So that's my concern when we start to create a program with no transportation and a program where there is not the same access to level 4 services, that you do start to see students dropping out and then students not accessing that program, regardless of where it is in the county. So I feel like this is a better model. And so I would support more the immersion programs. I do understand and hear my colleagues that means generally they're going to be in Spanish. And so we do have to find ways to expand other languages. I will push back a little bit to saying that it can't be proficiency based, even if it's 2 times a week, because that has not been my experience. I think that used to be the way we looked at it and the way I first started teaching flex in Fairfax County. But I do think that the latest best practices do show that you can focus on proficiency. It's just how far you get in that proficiency. I agree.
And that's the point. I mean, we're not talking about this, subjectively. That's based on national testing that we're doing with students and what level of proficiency they're at. So you're 100% right.
I don't want to hear proficiency versus non-proficiency. I think it should all be proficiency, I guess is what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the level of proficiency, because I think I was telling Noelle, I spoke to one of our teachers recently who had taken 6 weeks of Spanish, and I could tell she had a proficiency-based teacher because she asked and answered questions right away. And that's what we want to be seeing. That's what, if we want the language to be the premier focus, or the main focus in a language class, and you can do proficiency, and it can be there. They're just communication blocks that you teach and you practice. So that's one area where I would like to say, yes, I get that we want to incorporate and integrate with other areas, but the proficiency should be number one. I would also like to see, I love the maps. My question is, I think I brought up is the AAP, because we do have AAP programming, local level 4. So I would love to see where we have overlap of students being able, not having to choose language versus having access to level 4 services. So where are those offered in the same school? And I know we have a couple models like Braddock that are doing it really well. So I think that's another area that I would like to see. But I think those seem like reasonable goals. I don't know what we mean by the lottery program, so it would just mean to be thoughtful about that in the languages. So that on the elementary level, I guess my other question on elementary, I don't know if we've considered to be a little more creative. Schools where I've taught K-8, we have less frequency in the younger grades. And then it becomes more frequent as the brain is much more ready in 5th and 6th grades, or 4th, 5th, and 6th. So logistically, I don't know what that would mean, but that's another area to be creative, especially as we have some middle schools that have 6th grade, right? So can we increase the frequency of students are older? I believe in Europe, you start with one language, and then 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, you add another language, right? So maybe being creative in that way. And I want us to be clear that it's more cost neutral, but I think where we've seen a lot of the staffing challenges, that it's not fully budget neutral to do the local language immersion well, right? Finding staff who are qualified, addressing the dual certification requirement at the elementary level, and realizing how we need to support principals so that they feel comfortable with staffing. Because not only, is it challenging, but now we're no longer one of the few systems offering this, right? So we have more and more competition. I know my position was very hard to fill, just the ability to find qualified teachers. So figuring out what we need to do to support principals in schools so that they feel comfortable with the staffing. I think those were, at the elementary level, some of my comments. But overall, I feel like that's a much better place than I've seen us look at in the past. For the middle school, I have some hesitation. So I actually believe your thought of trying to see gathering more data. I don't think we have enough data yet, so I would support what staff is recommending. I lean toward, as a language teacher, you get a lot more out of slowing down, doing it well, not lowering the effective filter, number one. And if our number one goal is students be able to learn and love and be lifelong learners in a language, pushing them through, it is not a math, so I will push back on that. you have to be at ease, which is why adults drink wine and learn language better. But for students, you know, having them be comfortable, and I've seen a big difference. We can have some lessons between one and the other, is students will learn more, will get more out of it, will be able to become more proficient if they're comfortable and feel that they can learn. So that's where I would support getting more information and not ending the pilot we started before making a decision on that. And then finally, for the high school, I also think this is a better format. I think, and the research has shown, you know, elementary school, middle school, especially elementary school, it's good to have access to a program, a language, to learn how to learn a language, to have access to, you know, the cognitive benefits of that, and then to get to a point where by the time you're in high school, you have more options, as you say, Noelle, the many flavors of language. And as students are in high school, I think using the online campus and technology is much more, you know, at their developmentally appropriate. It does offer students in our large, geographically expansive and traffic congested system, I think, an ability to have a little bit more flexibility. I know the recent, you know, I've heard from many parents, and we sent out a survey. In one school, you know, Hebrew, for example, we don't have enough students. But across the county, you know, an area where I know I learned Hebrew, you know, just a very little growing up, I might be able to access that online, and students across the county. So I think looking at these more flexible options for high school, to me, seem to make a lot of sense. And so I would support that. I also hear my colleagues and trying to figure out a better system than when we have right now for just the school-specific survey. So whether it's a county-wide survey of different possible languages we're looking at, so we can get a better sense of what our students or our families want before coming up with our strategic rollouts. So I think that would be helpful. That's the one other ask I would have, is that we figure out how to get a better sense of county-wide what our students would like to see. I hope I shared my thoughts on that.
Great, thank you. Janie, Ilyoung, Pat.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for presenting us with leadership team recommendations for expansion. Thank you. Gives us a way to go forward so that we're not lost in the desert.
Janie, can I just say, I want to compliment Sloan. He came to leadership team and said, Scott, it's time. We need to take a stand. We need to bring this board what we think is our best practice. They may not agree. There may be pushback. But the more that we put forward our best thinking, the better the board's going to appreciate it. And I just appreciate you saying it, and I want to give Sloan credit for making the 20 folks sit around that table and say, it's time to decide what we're going to do. So thank you, Sloan.
Thank you. We need the leadership and the best thinking of our educational professionals who know what they're doing. All right, starting at the elementary level. I would like to see more access to world language at the elementary level. I am very concerned about I know that when we first decided to go down this road, we wanted to do learning through the curriculum. And I am finding kids and parents who find it boring, and that they would like a little more music or dancing or food or games or something. So I know we went to a lot of trouble to rewrite the curriculum, but if we want the children and the parents and everybody else to appreciate this wonderful opportunity, they have to look forward to it. Okay, so that's...
You, Ms. Strauss.
Can you unpack that?
Yes, that's right.
Janie, can you unpack that when they say it's boring? What do you mean?
Well, what I hear is learning the language through science and math for young children is simply not as engaging. If the kids are singing, dancing, food, culture, conversation, something that is innate, that is immediately meaningful to them, because the kids do want to talk and they want to communicate. And so communicating and talking about things that already make sense to them, where the vocabulary and the interchange is engaging. So
I just want to recognize that or acknowledge that we recognize that as well. I think some context is important about why did we get here, and it doesn't mean that we can't change our current state.
We asked you to go down that road.
There's no question about it. But when we did the task force, there was a lot of discussion about how to incentivize ways for schools to be interested in adopting the programs, right? Because we had a program that we thought had the right engaging strategies instructionally, but schools weren't implementing it. So one of the things that we heard from schools was that they wanted to reinforce the content that students were being held accountable for, and we wanted to put in STEAM activities because there was so much competition. Principals felt to offer one or the other, trying to fit everything into a limited time frame. And now the number one thing that we hear when we do focus groups is that we don't have the right mix and the right balance, as you're saying. So it's something that we definitely are aware of and we need to address.
Right, and I certainly remember the conversation because we thought that would be a good way to go. So the other issue at the elementary level, I think, doing where appropriate, two-way immersion, it's very effective. It's good. It's a good learning model. It is inexpensive, and it also depends on, obviously, where we have the population. But any of the elementary immersion programs, I know that the challenge is finding the teachers who are dual certified. And I've had lots of conversations with principals because I have a bunch of those programs. I don't have a solution to it, but I know that my French immersion, the question is, can we continue on and actually find somebody to teach it? We've had a terrible time. So, and the state doesn't want to back off on the elementary certification. And when the state came in with that, we lost a lot of teachers. They went to middle school because they didn't have to be certified in elementary. So that is a problem. At the middle school level, I am not as I can see why some kids would want to take the first and the second year of a language in 7th and 8th grade. I am very concerned about the resume building and the stress level. I deal with an awful lot of that, and I can see kids, getting rid of the world language requirement very early on, and then because I have kids who run out of things to take in high school. And then it also, and for those students who are the most competitive, sometimes they are the ones who we very much need to get them to be a little more explorational. They need to be able to do some other pieces. So I can see in some of my middle schools, this will set off the huge increase in competition, which is just, and I would get parents come at 6th grade and say, well, my child took X, Y, or Z in summer school. I would like the second year of the language in 7th grade, because I get that in every other academic area, and we keep trying to keep a lid on that. I do think that your recommendations for high school, I think all of that makes great sense, and certainly making sure that languages are available. I also am concerned about accessibility at our academies, because again, I know and you were probably part of the conversation, we will offer Chinese at Langley and Cooper next year, along with McLean and Longfellow and Kilmer and Marshall. And you all were at those meetings. The Langley students and parents do not want to get on the bus to go to Marshall. They are not going to give up that academic period. And again, these are very competitive students. But they are very determined to take those languages. So, we will offer that as part of the core program. We'll see how many kids sign up for it. But these are the same children who will be studying these languages on the weekend as well. So they are very determined. I also do wonder over time, as I am also watching the dramatic increases, families coming from other parts of the world to work in the STEM industry overnight, and what that is going to do for interest in language, what it's going to be, and how we're going to accommodate that. So that I don't know, but that's coming. I appreciate the recommendation. I'm glad that we're paying attention as to what we're doing, and continuing to move forward, because it is important that we meet our goal of all students being proficient in 2 languages by the time they leave us. I am committed to that. So thank you very much for bringing this forward.
Okay, thanks, Jeannie. We next have Ilyong, Pat, and then Megan.
Okay, if I could have a superintendent back to his chair, that I have a better attention of him. Thank you, Dr. OBrien. Thank you for the presentation. I have a lot to say, but I'm not gonna spend next 30 minutes to do it because I know that other board members are on the list, and we have hard stop at some point. Let me start with the budget questions first. I see on page 9, slide number 19, that's the leadership recommendations for expansion. What part of that is already put in fiscal forecast, and what part is not?
Yeah, just double checking. We don't have any of the budgetary requests on this slide currently in the fiscal forecast.
So anything that we add gonna have to be added.
That's correct.
To the so far $15.6 million gap.
Yes.
Okay, with that understood, that I still believe that we need to make serious investments in this endeavor. Thanks for bringing out at the very beginning part of your presentation on slide number 3 about the background where we have been as far as school board commitments to our world languages is concerned, starting from 2006. And now we are in school year 2019, 13 years. I distinctly remember the debates that Janie and I were part, back in 2006, how they became a part of student achievement goals. Many times over, very heated debates at times, but finally the board put that in. It's been 13 years, and looks like, even though I appreciate the recommendations from the staff, we still have a long way to go, don't we? Probably another 20, 30, 40, 50 years before we get to where we committed back in 2006.
We won't let Sloan leave until he implements it completely.
I don't.
We're going to do it before I retire. I've got 23 more years to go, so we need to do it before then.
I don't want to sound too imposing and unfair to our current superintendent. Some of them were difficult issues that the school system had been wanting to achieve, including full-day K and uniform Mondays. When we took bold steps, we were able to achieve those. There were several more that I believe that we need to achieve. We just need to take some bold steps to be able to accomplish those. And I hope that this is the very first conversation of the board step, not to be done for another 13 years, but within the next couple of years that we have a concrete plan laid down. With that said, I'm going to start from the back because I took the notes of several pages. I'm going to go slow. I remember visiting a TwoWay Immersion program at Colin Powell a few months ago, that even though it's a TwoWay Immersion, you are supposed to be teaching the content. However, at the same time, kids were having so much fun. At the beginning of each class, you started with a singing and dancing and moving and mingling. That's part of this. So when you talk about balance, I'm not an expert. I'm not a professional language teacher. However, I saw that going on. That was exciting to see. Whether we can do better, I do not know. You are in a better position to judge that and determine that. And if there is a room for improvement, of course, we need to make an investment to do it. But I also remember as a former ESL student, 44 years ago, I had opportunities to do both learning the content through regular classes. As an ESL student, I was allowed to go to regular classes to learn the content. At the same time, I felt very comfortable in my ESL class because I had classmates in a similar situation, similar challenges, and similar learning needs. And the most fun part I always look forward to was playing a bingo game. Playing a bingo game. I was already 17, but the lollipop that I would be winning by hitting bingo, but playing a bingo game, we are picking up the listening comprehension very quickly. Numbers, sounds, and word. But there was part of the game having a lot of fun to do it. So having a lot of fun to learning the content, that's what I'm trying to remind my colleagues. Probably that's the way to do it, and that's based upon my experience. That's based upon my observation of a 2-day immersion program. 2-day immersion programs at ISA call Empower. Excellent. I'm going to talk about a little bit about staffing issues at especially elementary, 2-way immersion program. I mean, same thing probably extends to middle and high school as well, but especially elementary school, because the teachers are required to know elementary curriculum in addition to ability to teach another language. That's hard. And what I want to suggest is this. I mean, it's all going to cost money and time and effort. However, we cannot wait we should not be waiting until the year before, or just a few months before, and start getting job application. We need to start even more than a year. We know the program is going to go from kindergarten to second grade, first grade, and second grade, third grade. We know that we made a commitment to go all the way to sixth grade, fully knowing that don't wait until a few months before to start recruiting. Do that even a year earlier, and when you find the right candidate, find out what additional professional development support that particular candidate may be needing, and support that person fully, so that when the person comes in, the person can be fully prepared to tackle the challenges ahead. I mean, that's my suggestion. Of course, that's going to require additional budgetary support. And I don't know how much that will be, how extensive that will be, but that's just something I want to task a superintendent and our DIS staff to look into. In a few, I guess about a couple of months ago, superintendent, I had a distinct opportunity to visit another country and be able to go to some elementary school classes. And I bet the superintendent will remember how elementary school students in those classes try to communicate with him, not necessarily with me, but with him in language other than their native language. Those students start learning English from third grade. That's part of their regular curriculum. The Korea implemented teaching Korean from third grade from 1997. They've been doing that for already 21 years. Now demand has been growing to expand that to go to first and second grade, because actually kindergarteners in their kindergarten, which is not part of their regular school structure, kindergarten is separate. In the kindergarteners learn English. And then somehow they get to stop in first and second grade, and parents don't understand why. So they are trying to liberalize that, give us students more opportunity, continue learning their language all the way through from kindergarten all the way through college years. And we got this in 2006. We are already 10 years behind. 13 years later, now we are how many years we are behind in this effort? That when you were having this debate, when Jenny was there, I don't know whether Jenny will remember for me to say this, that we, Fairfax County Public School System, are trying to produce and develop leaders in global community. In order for our students to become true leaders, they gotta be able to understand the people and other countries we are leading. Our students are going to be leading. World languages, foreign languages, second and third and fourth languages. It's not just the barely means of being able to understand what the person is saying, but through these languages, you understand their culture, their history, their values, their tradition, why they say, why they act, why they think such a way. So truly be able to understand people. When you understand people, when you have a true grasp of understanding of people, we can lead them. Without that, we cannot become true leaders. That is why this is so critical for our students in Fairfax County Public Schools, if not for the entire country. So with that said, onto the recommendations. I will support high school recommendations. But this is a minor point that I think 5.5 full-time FTEs, is that the 0.6 million? Because I see two different numbers. On one slide, I saw 0.5 million, and I see 0.6 in your recommendation slide of page 19. 0.5 I saw was from slide number 8, and 0.6 was a slide number 19. Whether am I seeing two different things, or just two different numbers for the same thing?
Let's go to slide 8, if you will, because that's where the broken down costs are. So the 5.5 FTE that you see there is the 0.5 million. What you're looking at on slide 19 is the FY20 costs. But on slide 8, what we're looking at are the costs across multiple years to phase those recommendations in. So that's the distinction.
Hold on a second. Again, this is a small amount. On slide number 8, timeline FY20, $500,000.
Right.
So recommendation for on slide number 19, 3-year approach FY20, 0.6 million. Could that be 0.55? So I could be either look into, if you could get back to me sometime.
Yeah, we can clarify the math on that.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. I could support that. As to the online campus, I don't mind supporting this, but I'm going to link this to the middle school recommendation. When I heard about some of the concerns, those are valid concerns. I could understand that. I mean, again, you guys are the professionals, I'm not. So, teachers, certainly, building principals may have those reservations and concerns and questions. Etc. I do understand that. But when I heard about potential gap after a student complete all the way through maybe even AP level, there may be a year or two gap before they reach the college level. Let me point out a couple of things. First of all, the fact that a particular student has completed all the way through AP in a particular language does not necessarily mean that student is going to be continuing with the language in college. That's one. So when you talk about gap, I don't know what gap you are talking about. Secondly, unless that student is going to continue with the language in college, for those students who may be wanting to continue in the language, that's when online campus will be very valuable. Those high-level learners, it's much more of, in my mind, academic languages, high-level textbook readings, writings. Those will be probably more critical for those very advanced language learners. I could be wrong, but that's how I see it. So that is that. For 7th graders, if we offer algebra 1 to 7th grader for high school class, high school credit, and the particular students, upon entering a freshman year in high school, have an option not to keep the grade on the transcript. Why not? Why not? Your recommendation is to try at least one per reason. I mean, I'm not as comfortable with a one per reason, but you put model qualifier right there, at least. So I want to see what the at least is going to produce year from now. I have high hopes, but at the bottom line, I at least see one per reason, which is a huge improvement over what you have from my perspective. So I will support that. I will support that. For the elementary school, I do not know what to say, but the fact that only 1/3 of our elementary schools are offering world language opportunities in terms of equity point of view, that's absolutely unacceptable. And for certain reasons, it does not necessarily always have to be a certain languages either. The students have to be provided with a diverse, different opportunity to try on. I think Chairman Corbett Sanders mentioned about 3 schools in Fairfax County, 3 high schools in Fairfax County not offering Latin. I bet that if you really look for students from those schools, you will find at least one student, and we are denying that student an opportunity to take Latin because it's a staffing issue, isn't it? It's a budgetary issue, isn't it? So it's coming down to money. So money is becoming a hindrance to providing equity. I think that's what we need to tackle on. That's what we need to tackle on. Let's see whether a particular Mount Vernon, Lee, Justice High School, how many students are willing to study Latin, and based upon our staffing formula, that only provides, let's say that from level 1 through level 5, AP level, it only provides quarter of a teacher to teach 5 sections, which is impossible because that requires full-time teachers. That would require another 75% of additional staffing to be provided in addition to what they will normally get. I think that information gotta be provided to board members so that from one Fairfax point of view, board can make a judicious decision, so where to put the resources. I rest my case.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. We now know we have to offer you a lollipop to get you to stick to 3 minutes, so we'll do that in the future. Next we have Pat, Megan, and then me.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple of things. Just wondering about, and these may be things that we've already thought about, but Tammy, when you were talking about French, you know, I know my sister teaches in Kansas City Public Schools at a French immersion, and they have a lot of teachers from Africa, and they have partnered with teachers' colleges or education colleges. And so like with my sister, she was put through Teachers College at Columbia, and she owed Kansas City Public Schools 5 years. Now that's a big investment from Kansas City Public Schools and teachers, but it is, if we're serious about, you know, finding those teachers, we may have to go get them and pay to get them. So just a thought. And I'm sure that there are, well, anyway. On middle school, I agree with going slow. I think that's a good idea, although I also hear Mr. Moon's point. I always kind of feel like middle schools are centers. They're already serving several elementary schools. So, you know, I do feel like it's important to try to have the same availability everywhere, but that's probably what everybody thinks. High school recommendations look good. I think on that, it seems to me the online distance learning option has to be available, right? Because it's the only way that we're going to overcome some of these hurdles. Because, you know, every time we hire a teacher one place, it means we're not hiring someone somewhere else. We have to recognize the, you know, the opportunity cost there. On elementary, I wanted to ask a few questions, and I'm sorry I wasn't here for your opening remarks. The 2 different kinds of immersion programs, right? Basically school-based immersion programs, which that's what we call TwoWay, yes?
That's correct.
Okay, and then the other is the lottery type, which is like what we have at Fox Mill, the Japanese immersion, right?
That is true. There's
Okay.
there's a little bit of a distinction.
No,
Continue.
well, that's what I'm wondering. Yeah, if you could just help, again, sort of describe the difference between the two. And also, I have a question. Are either of them or any immersion programs in our county full school programs? And I think they're not, but I just wanted to ask about that because I have mentioned that's the kind of school I teach in Arlington, but Arlington only has 2 of those in their whole county because it is very resource intensive. So
that's right. So we don't have any school-wide immersion programs, meaning every student in the school participates in the immersion program here. We only have some students in our school participating, and it has been a capacity issue and reason why we haven't done that. So that's the answer to your first question. The second question is the distinction between the school-based and the lottery programs. The main distinction is in the school-based programs, we're serving all students in that program are from the base school. Okay? The 4 schools that we list here are two-way, meaning we have 50% of the students who are native speakers of the target language, Spanish in this case, and 50% of the students in the classroom are native English speakers. Okay? So with the division-wide lottery program, those programs are open for students coming from outside of the school, and many of the students pupil place into those programs. They have to provide their own transportation to do so, so that was one of the challenges and the equity issues that we talked about. There are a couple of the division-wide lottery programs that are two-way immersion, meaning they have that 50-50 mix of native speakers and of the target language in English, and they're still lottery programs. And the reason that is the case is that those schools couldn't fill the two-way immersion program with enough students just from the base school. So we opened them to the lottery to bring in other students to be able to make sure that those programs could run.
meaning that the base school, there's not enough of 50-50 to create the program. Okay.
Right.
So then your total population at that school is not 50-50. But
Right.
But the population in the program is 50.
And the threshold that we use is like a third of the students would be native speakers of the target language, because when we do the math and we look at the trends, that would give us enough students to overcome the attrition rate of students dropping out potentially of the program at the later grades.
Okay. Yeah, right. A third of the whole school population.
33% of the whole
Can you
school
clarify,
population.
in those programs, was there not enough interest in enrollment, or were there not enough eligible
Not
students?
enough interest in enrollment.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, all of the immersion programs that we have are sort of a school within a school, a program within a school,
That's right.
So they're separate classrooms.
That's right.
Do we foresee, is it possible for the school-based immersion programs, they're two-way, could we foresee a future where some of those would be full school? I mean, is that possible?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, but then again, those are the kinds of questions that we would need further conversation with the board, because then what you'd be doing is you'd be focusing on getting immersion in a particular school full scale, as opposed to scaling to more schools and more geographic diversity across the county. It's just about
the resources.
It's just about
teachers.
the capacity and the resources to find enough teachers to be able to deliver instruction this way.
Okay, so
And can I just say,
yeah.
just to be honest, and knowing what I've heard you say before about equity, it's capacity, but it's also true when school within a school, some parents choose to be in it and some choose to not. And sometimes there's an equity overlay or an equity lens about who chooses to be in those programs and who doesn't want to be in those programs. I just want to say that as well. I would love to get us where we could have full school-wide. And some parents would say, hey, I don't want that in that language. What would we as a system say to those parents? Would we offer an alternative school to attend?
Right, and I think that is how Arlington deals with that, is basically parents do have other choices. It's not a neighborhood school, it's a magnet school, right? So they can go somewhere else. So then I would ask, because you're right, equity kind of runs all different ways, and you started to bring it up, right? Which one of these models would you say is more equitable, inclusive, when we talk about, the relative concentrations of certain demographic groups in classrooms, you know what I mean? There's kind of what you were just talking about, right? Because we know that our lottery programs, I think, when we look at those classrooms, they do not represent the population.
in terms of demographically, and that has to do with parent choice and all those socioeconomic factors, that come into it. Which one of these two models do you think is more equitable in that sense and inclusive?
I think it's hard to answer that question because there's multiple, different ways to frame it. I guess what I would say is moving forward, what we ought to be thinking about is strategic placement of magnet programs that are going to be those lottery programs, right? Because if you place them in a school where you have representation that's more diverse, right, then a lot of those students are students that are going to benefit from that program, and other families that might have the means could choose to pupil place and provide transportation if they had the ability to do that, to pupil place into that school. So I think that's kind of the balance in terms of a more equitable and more diverse magnet program. And I would say the other piece of this is I don't think there's like one answer to one delivery model. I think our system is too big, and I think we value choice too much to just have one delivery model. So I really do think we need different approaches. Immersion makes sense in some contexts. I think a part-time program makes sense in other contexts. So they both have their benefits and challenges.
Okay, then have we looked at practices or strategies for making these programs more inclusive, more integrated? I mean, what do we do about, working against that socioeconomic pressure?
Well, that's kind of what I was suggesting moving forward, is more strategic placement of where we would put programs so that we would open up access to families that might not have the means to be able to provide independent transportation for their kids.
Okay, all right, so that's one way to do it, right? But right now, are we doing anything, or do we just... Are we doing anything to try to encourage?
Well, within the school, we do a lot of things. I mean, these conversations are hard because they really are short, right? So I think sometimes we overgeneralize how these programs are set up. The FLES program, the LTC program, it's not just focusing on math and science, right? It does focus on a lot of those other areas that are more engaging, but it doesn't focus primarily on those things, right? So we don't have programs. It's hard to characterize the programs one way. So within the programs that we do have, the teachers are doing a lot of work to look at those opportunities for integration, as Ms. Polachek was talking about, and we do a lot of that work now already. I think the issue that you have, if you just look at the numbers of who are accessing programs, you're seeing inequities because you're seeing the families that are choosing to place into the lottery are the families that have the means to be able to, the time and the means to be able to provide transportation on their own.
Right, so that school-based program, right?
Right.
Where as much as possible you're pulling from that school, right?
Right.
And then, so that does seem to me like it's more equitable and more inclusive. The more kids you have from that school population and the fewer you have from outside.
Well, but I think it depends what are the demographics of that school, right? So like if we were strategically going to place programs in Title I schools, and then you're going to open those programs up for some slots that are outside placement, that you're creating more economic diversity, if you will, within a Title I school by doing that.
Well, yeah, sure, within the school as a whole, but perhaps not within the program. You know what I mean? Within the the actual immersion classrooms, because we always have that by classroom problem.
But students in their base classroom aren't just necessarily with the exact same students all day. I mean, they have their specials with different students from different classes. So there's a lot of integration across the specials programs, which is a big part of their day too.
Okay.
I know this is one of these things that's kind of hard to cover in just a few minutes. So.
Well, it is, and I think in general, one of the things I want to bring up for our forum topic, if and I hope we're willing to talk about it, is taking a look at all of our magnet programs, because we do need to provide those choices for families, and we can't do every great thing in every school, right? And this is one of them, AAP is one of them, our art science magnets, I think these are great ideas, but I don't know that we've ever kind of taken a holistic look and said, is there a better way to do that is more inclusive and does not have the effect of, creating concentrations in different classrooms. So anyway, well, thank you for your patience on that.
Okay, great. Megan?
So I have some thoughts based on listening to everyone's thoughtful input to date, but I wanted to first ask, has the division looked at other school districts, whether here in the Washington area or otherwise, where you've identified their delivery of world languages as sort of a best practice model? And if so, what districts are those?
I mean, off the top of my head, I could get you more specific information,
Okay.
but we continually look at different program models. I mean, personally, I'm very familiar with different program models from different divisions that I've worked in. I personally started a charter immersion school, right? So, I mean, our world language team is always looking at different models, just like our other content areas are. So we're very
Okay.
familiar with different types of program models.
And the reason I ask that is because I appreciate what you've listed out here, but I was thinking that it might help for board member comfort if we kind of had a sense of some other programs around the country that we've sort of identified and said, because most people look at us and say, oh, you're Fairfax County Schools, you must have a best practice in everything. And then, of course, we know that we're continuously improving like everybody else. So it's just, that was kind of on my mind. And so as a next step, that would be great to just get a sense of the ones that you've come to look at and say those are kind of a standard bearer of really good world language delivery. And then the other things that I wanted to speak to is that, first of all, even though we absolutely believe in being a collaborative school division, one of the thoughts that went through my mind is that sometimes it is not always a democracy. And when we look at how we were going to get more foreign language into our schools, as much as we wanted to entice our elementary school principals in particular with that buy-in and how we would deliver it. We were doing it through language, through content. In the end, I think what I heard this afternoon is that there's a very firm mindset of we need to be approaching this from an educational best practice. And that for a lot of us, whether through some of us who are foreign language teachers, some of us are English language learners from way back in the day. Some of us, like myself, growing up in California in the first grade, they started teaching us in Spanish how to count to 15, how to say your colors, how to say fruit. And I went on to study French, but 45 years later, I can still go back to all those things that I learned, those Spanish words. And so, you know, Dahlia, I think a lot of people spoke to it, but I really appreciate how you captured it. And I wrote down, I mean, we want kids to, their exposure to foreign language as early as possible is that to learn it and love it. And so, you know, we don't want foreign language, especially when we know the brain is most receptive, to learn it through joy and to learn it through the culture and the food. And I mean, we do that. We lay down that foundational love of learning, not just a foreign language, but the culture that comes with it and the interesting histories to it. You will get the lifelong learner who wants to learn foreign languages for so many different reasons other than what credits will I earn or how do I, you know, fulfill a requirement in order to get it out of the way. And so I do hope that we will look at, in Fairfax County, how do we develop a model that really creates that joy and that love of getting mastery and becoming not just proficient in other language, but really becoming that global citizen that we celebrate so much. So I do want to say that Ms. Schultz had brought up earlier, coding, American Sign Language. We have some students where learning a foreign language can be difficult. And so where we have other options where, especially like coding, it is considered a foreign language in terms of being able to communicate in that technical language. So I just want to emphasize that again, that I fully support our division looking at ways to do that. And then in terms of these recommendations up here, so the only thing that caught my eye, starting from the bottom and going up, just thinking elementary progression. So it said hold on expanding FLUS and LTC at this time. And the only thing that concerns me a little bit, because I think my colleagues did a really good job of talking about where we have foreign language in elementary schools right now and where we don't, like the pockets of where it isn't. FLES and, the LTC, at least it's a way to somehow get it in as many of our elementary schools as possible. Though I, again, really like the idea of coming at it not through content, but through culture and food and all that. So I guess I would say, Dr. Brabrand, I'm certainly supportive of looking at implementing some other programs, but I'm a little worried that if our energies go toward, doing 3 immersion programs, 2 division-wide lottery programs, we have 150 elementary schools. As it was noted, there's about 54 out of our 150 that have it. I'm looking at what's the delivery model where we can get some sort of exposure to foreign language at the elementary school level as soon as possible. So that would be my only reservation with that. Middle school, expanding the pilot, I've heard different things about people's concerns. If the worry is that people will take it, students might be motivated to take language in the 7th grade for not necessarily, again, that the mastery and the joy of learning a foreign language, but it's kind of checking a box and getting to that, then wouldn't one possibility be that it's just not going to count toward your high school diploma, and then that way you take it like an elective because you just want to be able to start your exploration into a foreign language a year sooner? Or am I missing a connecting point here? Like I guess I like the idea of kids being able to take language as early as 7th grade. What I heard was the fear that it might supplant students then taking some of our other electives. But I know for some students, some of the electives we offer, while they're really great, they don't necessarily meet the needs of all students. And so, I mean, even my boys at times were kind of looking to just find an elective to plug it in, and maybe they would have liked just to go ahead and start Spanish 1 year earlier. So that's what I'm just kind of wondering.
I think we kind of have that in a sense now with the 2-year sequence of level 1,
okay.
Part A in 7th grade, Part B in 8th grade. So the student that wants to maybe take it a little bit slower and more, explore it a little bit more, I think that typically is in place now. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, maybe it's how we present it to our families and our students, which is it's not, because sometimes people hear slower pace and go, well, I don't need a slower pace, so never mind. But instead, if it's that the delivery is, we want this to be an enculturating experience, that this goes beyond just your grammar introductions,
right.
Yeah, then maybe it's something, again, where people will feel like they're getting more positive immersion into the program.
We used to offer the IFL, Introductory to Foreign Language, around the wheel.
With the introduction of the level A and level B, we do not do that any longer, except for we do have some programs in in the middle schools for 6th grade.
Okay, and then for high school, again, I guess I would say at the macro level to my colleagues and Dr. Presidio and Dr. Brabrand, I'm not going to necessarily weigh in and say, yes, absolutely do that. I mean, if you all have done the study, and again, as mentioned earlier, being the subject matter experts, to say, we've looked at this intensively, we really believe that these recommendations up here are how we will get to the next degree of greater language delivery, then I can be supportive of that. Again, with the idea that I would, just like to get a little more appreciation for, just as a board member, to know and understand whether divisions are doing great work in this arena. And I want to emphasize again that the purpose of having a superintendent and having assistant superintendent and a leadership team is to bring to the school building the best practice model. And so I would just like to reinforce again that while I love that we want to collaborate with our building school principals, they are there to manage the buildings. They're teachers who are now administrators, but they're not subject matter expertise in things like world language delivery. So if the division now says, this is how we're going to be delivering foreign language because this is going to benefit our students, then I think we have to lead a little bit more with that confident voice. I don't want to look for ways to make it, how do we sell it down there? I think that makes sense. And then finally, I'll just say this because it was mentioned by one of my colleagues. We did run late today, but we ran late because we had an incredibly ambitious agenda. School board members were asking substantive questions. We were wanting to really understand through data the things that were presented from us. And yes, I know from a continuous improvement standpoint, we can all focus on our ability to be more streamlined in our input, but I worry at times that we're really hard on ourselves publicly and sometimes to a fault. I don't think today was because the board was undisciplined. I just think we had a lot on our plate and we'll keep trying to figure it out, but I'm very appreciative for the dialogue we were able to have today on everything so far. I think it was meaningful and we needed to do it.
Okay, thanks, Megan. I'm going to take my turn. So just building off of that, I hope to get us done by 6:20 because I know folks have things beginning at 6:30 tonight. And to Mr. Moon's point about putting off the strategic plan agenda item, I'm sorry, but we certainly could stay for until 10 p.m. tonight to do that. But I don't think any of us are in the mood for that. So to start off, I agree with Mr. Moon 100% that this is the time when we need to take a bold step. We've been talking about this since well before 2006, but 2006 was really when it was codified by this board that we were going to make proficiency in 2 languages an outcome for our students. And I told, when we had our pre-meeting with Sloan, I told him explicitly to bring us a big investment that we could look at. And so this is what has materialized. So I agree fully with Mr. Moon and others who feel this doesn't go far enough. It's certainly a step down that road, but I do envision this budget year is the time when we need to put our foot down and really make the investment that needs to be made. You know, I think also this, a lot of, as my colleague Ms. McLaughlin said, a lot of this has been the tail wagging the dog. We've been relying on school principals and communities to say, we've been waiting for them to say, give us something, instead of the board telling them we're going to be doing this and this is a district priority, which it has in fact been. So I think we're at the point now where we have to insist that this is a district-wide priority, and the board needs to determine where and when we need to make those investments, and it just has to be done. The principals have to find a way to make it happen. As others have said, this board 3 years ago said we wanted LTC in every school in the county. It didn't materialize. We got 14 more, but that's nowhere where we want to be. And as far as I'm concerned, this board already made the commitment to have foreign language or world language in every single elementary school. So that boat has sailed. We should have already made that investment, and we should be making that investment now. I do intend to bring a budget amendment on this issue. I'm sure others do as well, but I intend to bring the largest version I can find of what we can put up here, because as I said before, I do believe this is this can be a lasting achievement of this board to finally get this in a budget and passed and on the way. Another point that's been raised about the elementary school level, we continue to group languages in with the triple T. I have major problems with triple T anyway, because I think each of those items, whether it's arts, whether it's music or PE, those should all be part of the core. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be saying, okay, these are specials. They aren't specials, they're part of the core, just as language should be, and I think as this board has said, language should be. So, Superintendent, I would just say that I hope we can find a new way to envision our master scheduling at the elementary level so that all of these things are considered to be part of the core as opposed to being specials, because in Fairfax County nothing is special, it's all part of the core. Going back to one of the earlier slides where it's where we talk at a high level about what languages are offered, I think the board, it's certainly not going to get done today, but the board needs to have a discussion of what is a standard offering at every school, and we haven't gotten that far today. We have a standard offering of Spanish and French at every school, which is fine. Some might say we do need French at every school. Others might say, well, you know, there are other languages that should be prioritized. So I think that's a discussion that needs to be had. I don't think we have the time to do it today, but I am one that believes that we should have more language standardized at every school, and principals just need to make it work with their scheduling. So my sense, I'm happy to support what staff has brought forward. I know this is their best thinking, all this. I don't think it goes far enough. I think we should have language in every elementary school. I'm fine with the middle school option of continuing to pilot the 2-year offering and two-year separate credit offering. And at the high school level, I'm supportive of expanding both the academy and the online offerings. Again, I don't think it's enough. I think we need to get to a point where, with all due respect to what Sloan and LT have brought us, and I know Sloan would like to go further than LT perhaps, I do think we need to be even bolder than we have been today. So let's do the go-backs. We have Karen Keys-Gamarra, Sandy to start. Karen Keys was first, so let's go to Sandy and then Karen Corbett Sanders.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of other questions. And this was because Mrs. Strauss raised that some high schools are going to get Chinese next year. Is that right? They already have them this year, or they're going to get them next year?
So Cooper Middle School will be adding Chinese to their course offerings for next school year, and Langley will follow on after that. And that was done through a community survey, and then obviously enrollment will need to follow.
So are there? So what I'm getting at, are there other languages being added at schools that are not, that we haven't gotten the report on? If you look at the high school and middle school, so how many? Where are they going to be
what
added?
We typically do when a school has an interest in starting a new language is we conduct surveys, and just like we did with Vietnamese, and we start to plan that out. So right now what we're looking at is potentially Chinese at Langley, but probably not for 2 years. And then we've also been doing some investigation around Korean at both Chantilly and Westfield. And earlier in the year, we did some surveying around Hebrew at Woodson, but that has been determined not to move forward at this time.
Okay.
So those are the only ones we've been involved in surveying for.
And I guess I raise this because, again, going back to the equity issue, we're adding at some high schools at the same time. Some high schools still only have 4 classes. And I think one of the things we need to do is to be more deliberate about how we're rolling out our language programs, as opposed to just saying, okay, well, this community wants it, we're going to give it to them. Presumably, there's a price tag to all of these things, and I know, because I was involved in the Vietnamese, I understand how it develops, and it can be a very good thing. But now that we're trying to do this in a deliberative way, I think we have to think overall about where they go and why they go in different places, and what high schools, what middle schools get these programs. So at the same time, I believe last year, I'm just looking at what you gave us, that there were some high schools that eliminated language programs, correct?
So there are some high schools who have been phasing out languages. I mean, the reality is that the majority of the language offerings that are being considered are because there's a community base that has an interest in their children learning that language. So really the push has not been coming from a central place, and it hasn't been coming necessarily from the schools themselves, but they've been trying to respond to the communities where those students actually go to school, so they can offer those languages. But the reality also is, as a new language comes in to meet the demand of the current of the student body, some languages may get phased out because there isn't as much interest. Hence why academies and online campus will continue to be necessary in order to allow students to continue with languages that may no longer be offered at a school.
Right. I will go back to my main point, though, that I think we need to be more deliberative about where and why language programs are going into certain places. It shouldn't just be because you have one community that is particularly motivated, as opposed to another community that perhaps isn't as energetic about getting language programs. You know, we need to be thoughtful about where they go. As opposed, I mean, right now it seems like it's a bit haphazard. And you know, when we're talking about expanding them, we need to know where we're expanding them and why. Moving forward, I can support what you're talking about there with high school. I can support the middle school. At the elementary school level, I would want to know more specifics before putting my own stamp of approval on that. I would want to know where and how we were talking about expanding it. And because, again, I think how we do this and making sure we do it in a systematic way and in the right place makes sense.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. We have Karen Corbett Sanders, then Dahlia.
Thank you. And I will try to integrate. Karen Keys-Gamarra left me with 3 talking points, which there's some overlap with what I have to say, so it's great. I've spoken to Dr. Brabrand in the past about the FCPS promise. It's kind of, you know, what should be a minimum provided at every one of our schools in the county. And I believe that this internationalization, the world languages piece, is part of that FCPS promise, that we cannot facilitate the haves and have-nots in this county by having certain regions have a robust offering of foreign languages and others having a dearth. And part of it is because of exactly what you've just mentioned about how it really takes a grassroots effort from the local school. As a matter of fact, last week in the infogram, there was a message that was sent out to all principals that said opportunities are available to expand elementary world languages for school year 1920. The programs include TwoWay, Immersion, world languages in FLES, principals of interested schools, which is, you know, bravo that principals of interested schools. But principals that are fatigued or overwhelmed by the complexity of the demands that they have in their schools are not going to see this as something that they want to take on a new opportunity because of those challenges. But what happens is when you have schools that have a rich array of opportunities for kids, and then you have the schools that don't, then you have the pupil placement phenomena. And you have people going after opportunities to go find schools that have richer enrichment for their kids. And that's my biggest concern about this, is that we have to be much more strategic in how we're doing this. And when we look at the academy programs, I am very concerned about adding 3 additional languages to academies that already attract people from other schools and get pupil placement from other schools because of the availability of a language or a course. And so, especially in my region and the region that Ms. Derenak Koufax and I share, that could end up being a net negative if we don't look at perhaps starting another academy or providing those opportunities in schools that don't have them. That's my first concern about the high school. I mentioned it before, but I did want to reiterate it because of the impact on Mount Vernon and Lee in particular. It's my biggest concern. At the middle school level, I would encourage that when we're looking at a credit-bearing course, we should be looking at our middle years IB programs, because our IB programs are focused on having international languages. That's a key component of it. So when we're looking at the strategic location of these programs, we should be doing that. And I would urge, as a mom of a daughter who is now taking Swahili, but she is fluent in Spanish, she was very frustrated in 7th grade with this, the programming that was not as robust as it should have been for her in languages, because that happens to be her passion, is being able to speak to people in their birth language. And so when we take that off the table as being something that we want to support for our kids, then we're actually discouraging them from following their passion like we have, while we're encouraging kids to follow a different passion. And so I would say that we shouldn't make that decision for them. And then I would also urge that when we're looking at the elementary school programming, and this is just having having my children start school in Europe, the big part of starting elementary school in Europe is play in the non-home language. And when we look at a community where some counts 1/3 of our population is born outside of the United States, that doesn't mean that they don't have English proficiency, but our population really demands having foreign language or world languages in elementary school, creating opportunities where our children can learn from each other and learn about each other's cultures. And a lot of that is more through play rather than the sciences or math. And so we're just encouraged that. And I think I captured both Ms. Keys-Gamarra and my comments, but I would urge you to remember that the FCPS promise means that we meet our children where they are in languages as well as other disciplines.
Okay, we're going to finish up the go-backs with Dahlia and Tammy, and then we'll conclude.
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief, and I appreciate following you, Karen. I just really want to reiterate, having been a K-8 language teacher, that I won't feel comfortable supporting anything that does not also focus on the instruction, the sequencing, and the proficiency-based curriculum. I want to read a little excerpt from a school system whose materials I often used, Jefferson County Public Schools, Louisville, Kentucky. On their front page, it says, the elementary school sequence of world language study focuses on developing interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational communication through hands-on and interactive activities in real cultural contexts. The language of study is also used to support, and this is the value add, grade level content such as math, science, the arts, music, health, and social studies. And world language teachers use theme-based curriculum maps to guide their teaching. So I think you've heard, I think we're all kind of talking about not just, I don't feel comfortable just expanding, but how we expand it. Expanding it well, making sure that the practices in the classroom actually lead to engagement, to students who want to learn, feel they can learn, enjoy learning, and will continue to learn. And we'll continue to see the benefits throughout the curriculum. So I guess for me, that's really the one thing. I know I said it a little bit before, but I just really want to hone down that one of the areas I've seen that we kind of leave it up to schools and teachers to figure out in some ways is how to make that curriculum, the instruction, engaging, what the expected outcomes are, how we expect to see, the growth in students in their proficiency levels from elementary school, middle school, and then high school, and helping students see that there is this continuum. Yes, it would be ideal to have 90 minutes a week for students, but I don't want that to stop us, right? So how do we find other ways to have it be, whether it's interdisciplinary, or other ways to integrate it and try to get the proficiency we can. So I guess for me, it's not just having it, but how we're doing it, what's working, where are pockets of best practice internally, and active full, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel. They've been doing this research for 30 years. I believe their head used to be with Fairfax County. So really, how do we ensure that the equity is also in that implementation, integrity of implementation, and the professional development, seeing it as a core, not just an added extra, but ensuring that I think we'll get a lot more buy-in from schools and from families if they're seeing it well implemented with clear goals and clear guidance.
Great. Okay, so Tamster has the last word.
Tamster, thank you. Ryan Stir, what do I get? I am hopeful that we are not going to try to vote on this right now. I hear so many competing objectives, and I don't see any coherent plan about where we agree on certain things. I am not certain how we should proceed. Perhaps we can have a smaller work session to go back over this if we look over next steps, if some of those questions are clarified. But with 9 out of 12 board members here after a very, very long day and not having a lot of, agreement on all these areas, I'm going to ask, what are we going to do?
Okay, so thank you, Tamster. Are you done? Okay, she's done in more ways than one. So
kind to my son.
Can we get next steps up? So yes, we are not going to take a poll on this. I don't think that would be productive at this point. But let's look at these and then talk with Sloan briefly about next steps. Okay, so. First one, first two, Karen Corbett Sanders, can you look at those and see if they,
That one's fine. I'd prefer it not being online. For equity, I think that if we're providing it in person elsewhere, we should be providing it in person at each of our schools.
Can we strike the second one because that's one of the recommendations?
Yeah.
The thing that I would do is give priority for the IB schools.
Okay.
In that one.
Okay.
Okay, the first one, can we see a show of hands on that? Consider making Latin available.
We weren't going to do this today.
This was, no, we're just voting on next steps. Okay, fine.
I don't think we're doing that.
Okay. Well, here's my general thought from today's discussion, and I think everybody's probably a little tired, and I only participated in part of the work session today, and I sat and watched the other half, so I can appreciate people are probably tired, and we don't have the full board here. I'm wondering if it might be possible to go back and, as a leadership team, debrief a little bit on the conversation today and some of the things that we've heard, which I do think are captured in the next steps, and then come back to the board with some suggestions for how we would move forward. There's a number of things that we could do. One thing is we have one board member who is interested in putting a budget amendment together. We could work with, I could work with Mr. McElveen on that. We could come back with some additional meetings with board members that are interested in talking about some of their next steps in more detail, where we would have more time to focus on the areas of interest that are of particular interest to you. Some of those things might help advance this work a little bit more than just doing responses to next steps.
Mr. Moon,
my suggestion is, in addition to those, meetings with small group of individual board members, whether 2-to-1 or 1-on-1, I also suggest that we do have a follow-up work session on this one, so that we know, because we need to know where the board is on a consensus basis, at least by hopefully more than a bare majority. Yeah. So that I know superintendent probably has almost wrapped up his proposed budget, so probably most likely his proposed budget may not reflect this. But before I'm hoping that before we actually vote on his proposed budget. We'll have a discussion about this.
That's a good idea. And I think we could do all three of those things.
Okay, just so this is recorded correctly, have everyone just very briefly make sure your language is correct, so it's recorded, and then they'll take it back to LT.
As long as I have a follow-up work session on this,
Right.
put up somewhere.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so follow.
Can you
Okay. Okay, seeing no concerns, this list is adopted. Any last words, Dr. Brabrand?
You know, I think something you said, Ryan, earlier struck me. I was here in 2006 as a principal. I think it's been, the board had a priority and what was our approach to getting it implemented? And it was, we hope the schools will come to merge to the board priority. And I think after 10-year reflection, that gets us some of the way, but not as much of the way the board wants. And if we want to go more aggressively, then we're going to need to be clear that it's a board priority and we're working to do it based on that. And I think the other nugget for you all to know, just being straight honest with you, right, is that Triple T promises were made or understandings about what Triple T could or couldn't do in a school. The bottom line was lots of principals didn't think they had staffing to do that and other things, and it just flat fell down the if we made Triple T fully, if we fully staffed Triple T so that schools could do what they want, we can increase the foreign language possibility. I believe that. We do have a placeholder of $6 million in the budget currently for staffing. I can't remember the language, staffing, strategic staffing. And so that's something to think about as we look at this moving forward. But we'll do some work with LT, and we look forward to another work session on the topic, so thank you.
Thank you, everybody.